All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Friendly City Books podcast. My name is Emily Liner, and I'm the owner and founder of Friendly City Books. And today I'm excited to be joined by our friend, Linda Williams Jackson.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Emily. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming, Linda. So, Linda is a children's book author based here in Mississippi. And let me read her backstory for everyone who hasn't gotten the chance to read one of her books yet. Linda Williams Jackson is the award-winning author of Midnight Without a Moon, which was an American Library Association notable children's book, a Jane Addams Children's Book Award honor title, and a Washington Post Kids Post summer book selection. Her second book, A Sky Full of Stars, was named a Malka Penn Award for Human Rights and Children's Literature Honor Book and a Bank Street College Best Children's Book of the Year. Born and raised in Rosedale, Mississippi, Linda Williams Jackson now lives in South Haven, Mississippi with her family. And I have family who lived in South Haven, so I was very excited to get to meet Linda and have that connection. And I really loved her the third book that came out. I guess it was 2 years ago now. Linda, please correct me. Yeah,
April of 2022. Yes.
Yeah. So this is the Lucky Ones, and this is the book that brought us together.
Yes.
I may have told you this story before, Linda, but the way I found your book is I was going through our room where we save all the advance copies that publishers send to us. And I was going through and I was pulling books to donate to some of our local school teachers. And I picked this one up and I flipped it over and I saw on the back, it said that Linda Williams Jackson is from South Haven, Mississippi. And I said, wait a minute. I'm not going to give this book away. I'm going to keep it.
Thank
and
you.
then, and then I read it, and then we brought her to our local school, to the Columbus School District, to talk to the fifth graders in the school district. So that was a lot of fun. And Linda, I mean, what have you been up to since we did that?
Oh, wow. Just been busy with life and writing projects that, they haven't gone very far, haven't sold to publishers yet. But I've been writing and I've been promoting the Lucky Ones and doing events, and was just so happy to see my little book about the Mississippi Delta get so much national attention and so many award nominations in 2023 and make several state lists, school state lists. So just been doing a life thing, just living, being a wife, being a mom, being a volunteer, doing my volunteer work with the church and with schools, and just living and enjoying life and trying to be fruitful.
So one thing that I thought was so cool was when Kate DiCamillo recommended your book as one of her best books of the year.
Yes, that was mind-blowing and just an honor to have the Kate DiCamillo list my book first as one of her Read Brave reading challenges books. She said that Ellis Earl was a brave character, so that was an honor. And I think she listed maybe 7 books on that list. And then a few months later, she was on a Minnesota TV station being interviewed, and they asked for her top 5 recommended books for children. And again, out of top 5 recommended books, she mentioned The Lucky Ones, and she said it was a deeply moving book. So I was just flabbergasted and honored and totally happy that she would think so highly of my book. And later on in the same year, this isn't something that was made public, but she bought several thousand copies of the paperback of The Lucky Ones to be distributed to children in Nashville. So that just kind of sealed the deal. Kate DiCamillo is my favorite, not just author, but my favorite person, because I don't think anyone's ever bought several thousand copies of one of my books at one time. So hats off to Kate DiCamillo. I love her forever.
That's amazing. And I mean, I have to agree with her. I mean, it is a deeply moving book, and I love Ellis Earl, but let's give a quick summary of the book for someone who may not have read it already.
Okay. Oh, you want
Oh,
me to do
yeah.
it?
I would love for you to let me let it come straight from the horse's mouth, like
Okay,
have
I'll
the
just
author
read that
do the
copy.
summary. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Ellis Earl started out, ironically, as Annie. But my agent said, well, how are you going to make this character different from Rose in Midnight Without a Moon? And I thought about it. And first of all, Annie was younger than Rose and was going to have a totally different attitude. And of course, living a whole decade later than Rose. But I thought, well, why don't I just make this main character a boy instead? So that's how Ellis Earl was born. And the name Ellis is someone that I knew growing up. He's older than I am, probably maybe 15, 20 years older than I am, but he was such an inspiration when I was growing up. And I took what I thought he might have been like as a boy and infused those qualities into Ellis Earl. His name actually is Ellis. So that's where Ellis came from. And of course, the story is set against the backdrop of Robert Kennedy's visit to the Mississippi Delta in 1967. So I wanted a boy living in a large household like my family did. I have a whole bunch of brothers and sisters. And at one point during my childhood, we did live in a house that had only 3 rooms, actually several points in my childhood. And even when I was in college, while I was in college, my family moved into a 3-room house again. So I knew exactly what that was like to live in a very small house with a large amount of people. So Ellis Earl Brown is a kind-hearted boy who is flawed, just like any child. He's flawed in that while he can be very generous, he can also be very selfish. And while he's very loving, he can also be jealous of his classmates, his siblings. And he just wants a better life. He wants to live in a nice house. He wants specifically to live in a nice brick house in town, like what he sees when he goes to school. He wants food to eat. He wants to be able to have food all the time. He wants to be able to bring food to school like his teacher does for him and his classmates. So Ellis Earl is a dreamer. He has big dreams for his life. He wants to grow up to be a lawyer or a teacher or maybe even a writer so that he can buy his mom a house, buy his mom a nice dress, just help his family out of poverty. And through all of this, he is also studious because he knows that school is his only and best option. But at the same time, when the story opens up, he's bringing home a book, and it's a Hardy Boys mystery because his friend Philip has suggested he read this book. But Ellis Earl is afraid to read it because it's not a picture book. And that's what he's used to reading. Even though he's 11 years old, 6th grade, a good student, he's only been brave enough to read picture books because he's so afraid that if he reads a book that doesn't have pictures to guide him, he'll lose interest or he won't be able to picture the story. So that's his situation when the story opens. It's the weekend, no school equals no food equals no books, no access to his teacher's books, except that one book that he doesn't even want to read. So his teacher sees this in him, knows that he's afraid to be challenged by these bigger books, these chapter books, and he gives him a copy of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And Ellis Earl, right from the jump, knows that this is a book that he might be able to read because he sees this boy, Charlie Bucket, living in this 2-room house with all these people, with all of his grandparents, all 4 of them, sleeping in one bed, and Charlie sleeping on a mattress, just like Ellis Earl does, and Charlie never having enough food, just like Ellis Earl. So he sees his character in a book and he thinks, well, maybe I can read this book and maybe I can be like Charlie. Maybe I can be a hero. So the story chronicles Ellis Earl's journey along with Charlie Bucket's journey and culminates with Ellis Earl actually getting to meet someone who becomes his hero, and that's Robert Kennedy. And that's the gist of the story of The Lucky Ones. I hope I
Yeah.
did justice.
Oh, no, I think you did. I really do. I mean, so there are a lot of things that came to my mind as you were describing the book. And one is, that Ellis Earl doesn't have food to eat on the weekends. And, this is something that children today still face,
Yes.
food insecurity.
Mhm.
And Ellis is also going to school before school lunches
Yes.
were widely available.
Yes.
So he's kind of dependent on the kindness of his teacher bringing in extra food for him to
Yes.
have. The other thing that struck me as I was reading this too is he doesn't have regular access to get to school because there aren't school buses
Right.
at this time, or at least school buses that served his school.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was bad weather, they couldn't get out of their house to get to school, and his teacher would give him a ride.
Mm-hmm.
So it really touched me and like moved me to realize that this was the reality for many families before some of these programs were put into place nationwide.
Yes. Yes. um, when I was growing up, we did have the school lunch program. So we were able to have a hot meal each day. But my older siblings, specifically one of my older sisters, who is 18 years older than I am, she would always tell us how lucky we were that we had school lunch because they didn't. And she would also say how lucky we were that that our mom was able to get food stamps because that program wasn't in place when she was a child, and we rarely had food. Food stamps, I mean, while they're good and while, yes, it supplements and it helps people be able to eat, if you're in a very large family, that usually means you're only going to eat for about 20 days out of the month. And even then, it's not going to be like, you're not going to have lavish meals. So for a while there, I couldn't understand why she was always saying how lucky we were, because I didn't feel very lucky, because we would still have a good 10 days where we were wondering what we were going to eat. Or, yes, the school lunch was great, but you'd go to school hungry because there was no breakfast. I think by the time I was in 6th grade, we started having breakfast as well. They implemented the breakfast program, realizing that a lot of children were coming to school without having eaten anything. So while a lot of people might frown on those things and consider people who have to depend on food stamps or other social programs as lazy, that's just not the case. My mother was definitely not a lazy person. She had worked when she could work. And I didn't learn this until I was watching a video by Ralph Eubanks, who I know is a good friend of yours. And he was talking about the Mississippi Delta and how right before the big industrial revolution in the South, they were trying to convince Southerners that they needed to educate the Black people who were the field laborers, because there was going to come a time when that work was no longer going to be available to them. And they kept saying, what are they going to do? Once the field work is over, what are these people going to do? And it was ignored. And then it happened. And it happened in the late 60s, early 70s. The field work was just not there anymore because of industrialization of tractors and fertilization and all these things that made that where there was no need for people to pick cotton or to chop cotton as much. All of these throwbacks from slavery and sharecropping that Black people had depended on for their source of income were no longer there. So now what you had in the Mississippi Delta, I don't know about other places in Mississippi Delta, but for sure in the Mississippi Delta, you simply had a lot of unemployed Black people. My
Yeah.
mom being one. And you had a lot of unemployed, hungry Black people. And this is the environment that Robert Kennedy came into. And even with the nation's fight against poverty, Black people still were not getting access to the social programs. And I remember as a child when, as a young elementary age child, I remember people scrambling, trying to get the money together so that they could get their food stamps, because you didn't just go and get your food stamps. You had to pay for your food stamps.
I didn't
And
realize that.
yes, I remember I had spent the night at a friend's house, and her mom was going into town the next day to get her food stamps. And I remember she had to stop at her white employer's house to borrow the $25 so that she could pay for her food stamps.
And so speaking of that, that's, you know, the situation Ellis Earl's mom is in. She is working. She is looking for work whenever she can, but she's kind of beholden to these outside forces of, will she find work from white households in town? She has to walk into town, first of all. And then she has, you know, someone who she cleans house for, but it's not consistent. And sometimes she's turned away. And the one time she misses work because it rains and she can't walk into town, she loses her job that the next day because she said, well, I found someone else to do it because you didn't come in. So that really struck me about how hard Ellis Earl's mom was trying and just how much she was up against.
And again, that's just from my childhood and observing what was going on around me and remembering women in my family and other women scrambling for these jobs in white households, jobs as a maid or a job as a babysitter. I remember my older sister, whom I've already mentioned, was 18 and a half years older than I am, and how for most of her adult life, she was a babysitter for white households. But it was never enough money for her to live off. It was just enough money, you know, for her to have some extra money, but it was never enough to live off. And, you know, not trying to throw the blame at anybody else for people not being educated, but at the same time, an 8th grade education was what most Black people had access to. And a lot of Black people could not just pack up and go north. They didn't have access to that. They didn't have access to higher education. There were a lot of factors that held people back. And so the ones who did make it out, yes, definitely, they deserve a pat on the back, a compliment for being able to claw their way up out of those dire situations. But for a lot of the people who could not see their way out, I just don't agree with people pointing a finger and, you know, saying these social programs make people lazy or these social programs are for lazy people. No, they're for people who find themselves in a situation that for the time being, it's either starve or, you know, accept these programs. And in my case, my mother chose to feed her children. And as soon as I remember when we were all much older and when she was older and eligible, it was funny because we were all adults and she became eligible for food stamps in maybe her 60s or so. For some reason, she became eligible. And she said, what do I need food stamps for now? All of my children are grown. I don't need these. I don't need that. So she turned it down because she said, I don't need that. All of my children are grown.
Well, it
So,
wasn't for her. It was for y'all.
right. It was to so that she could feed her children. Because just like with Ellis Earl's mom, my mom she was proud. She had some pride about herself. So she didn't like asking for things, and she wasn't happy that she had to depend on these social programs, but she did what she had to do.
Well, okay. I would like to turn to the title of the book because in this discussion, we could kind of feel like, this is a really unlucky family that they find themselves in these circumstances. But that's not what you titled the book. You titled the book The Lucky Ones. So why did you do that?
Okay, that was a little play on words. I read Delta Epiphany by Ellen Meacham, and that was what sparked my interest in wanting to write this story. So when Robert Kennedy, and I want to see if you can, there we go, that picture on the back. I love that picture. I mean, I know it's a picture of impoverished children, but I love how that picture is just saying so much about the situation. And if someone had taken a picture of me and my siblings back in the 70s, we probably would have looked like that. So I wanted to tell this story from a point of view of a family that probably like this family, or probably like my family. Yes, we were poor, but we were trying. So the title came from the fact that when Robert Kennedy went back home to his family, and he told I think his children were preparing for his birthday, waiting for him, and they were in the dining room. They were about to have a feast for his birthday. And he said to his children that he had just visited a place where an entire family lived in a house small that could fit inside their dining room. And he looked at them and said, "Do you know how lucky you are?" And within the story itself, Ellis Earl thinks that everybody else is lucky. Everybody else is lucky except him. But then he remembers something that his uncle told him once, that children who get everything they want aren't always the lucky ones. So just because you have everything doesn't make you the lucky one. And that was the point I was trying to make. You're not lucky because you have everything.
Yeah.
And you can have nothing and still feel like, you're the lucky one, depending on what your situation is, compared to that person who has everything.
Yeah. I mean, over the course of this book, you really see Ellis Earl mature so dramatically over the course of 1 year. Not just in his, as you mentioned, like his reading ability, which is exciting to see him, like find a book that he loves, but he also, his teacher really takes him under his wing and mentors him and introduces him to a church where he finds belonging and where he finds opportunities to grow, like these opportunities for personal growth. And you just see him kind of blossom over the course of this year. And so I also was wondering if, like that's part of it too, is Ellis Earl's personal journey of discovery through this book too makes him lucky.
Yes. I would agree. And if we go back and tie in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, if you remember, Charlie, even though he found the golden ticket, which was very lucky, he still didn't seem as lucky as those other children.
But yeah, like this super rich little girl, Veruca Salt.
Right. You just don't feel as lucky as the person who has everything, but then you don't know what that person's going through. And then you'll realize, okay, wow, I might not have all that, but my life isn't so bad after all. And yes, throughout the story, you'll see, even, on the cover of the book, let's see, we see a cat, and who ends up with the name Lucky. And so the luck plays throughout the story, and I'm kind of interchanging the word luck and faith. So, it's you can call it what you want to, but I think they're kind of the same thing. Some people call it faith, some people call it luck. And I'm just choosing for the sake of the story to call it luck. And they even find good luck by going to church. And that's also was the story of my life, just connecting with church and finding people in that realm who took care of me and nurtured me and helped me see my way out.
By the way, Linda, do you know when I was a little girl, I had a cat named Lucky?
Wow. How about
I
that?
sure did.
Wow.
And there's some other little fun connections that I think like only Southerners might get in this book, like the moon pie. And so you've got
Yes.
this moon pie sign behind you, and there's
Yes.
even a moon pie on the book
Yes.
cover.
Yeah. It's interesting about the moon pie. When I was at an event, it was a local event, so I knew everybody in the audience. Well, there's one person in the audience who was, even though she's a Mississippian, she was born and raised in California. And she said, "What's the big deal about the moon pie?" Because she didn't understand everybody's infatuation with the moon pie. And so we all had to school her on the fact that moon pies are a big deal in Mississippi, probably in the South. I've been watching young Sheldon, and I see that his grandmother calls him moon pie. So I said, I guess
They
moon
get
pie
it.
is big in Texas too. So,
It's, and it's Mardi Gras season right now, and I'm actually going to go home for our hometown parade, and they always throw moon pies from the
oh,
floats.
wow.
Not just beads, but moon pies.
Wow. Well, this big moon pie tray was a gift from my agent. So,
Oh, that's cute.
yeah.
Well, okay, I would actually like to talk about your path. After you shared how similar your childhood was
Mhm.
to Ellis Earl and the Lucky Ones. And I mean, you are one of the lucky ones too, because you've gone on to have a really interesting professional career. Can you tell us about what you did, like uh, college, after college, and then becoming a writer?
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I remember all the way back in second grade. I was a good student, but I was also a fearful student. I think it's because I've always been an overachiever. So I always wanted the top everything. Like I always wanted a perfect score. If I made a 97 on a test, I was scrambling trying to see where I missed those 3 points. Like, what went wrong? I missed 3 points here. So I remember in second grade, I had that was when I had started stressing out about school. And I remember telling my second grade teacher that I wasn't going to go to college. I said, I'm just going to finish those 12 years and I'm done with school because I was already starting to feel anxious about it just in second grade. And she said, no, you must go to college. That's not an option. You must go. And I've never forgot that. Of course, as I got older, I realized, yes, I must go to college. So from very early on, I had it in my head that I would go to college. And so when I graduated high school, I was the first person in my family to actually go to college. And that was a challenge. That was a huge challenge, not the work. The work part was easy. It was the getting there. I mean, my family, we still pretty much lived in poverty. And even though I got grants and a little scholarship money for college, it was a struggle just to get there. I went to school in Starkville, which, that's at the time it was 3 hours from Rosedale. So I was always dependent on friends for a ride, and sometimes that didn't work out. And I remember missing a whole semester of college because one year I just didn't have a ride and I couldn't get there. So and I remember being hungry in college because that was before they started doing mandatory meal tickets, which I'm so glad they started doing that for college students, where as a freshman, that was part of your package. You had to have a meal ticket. And I just remember eating a lot of peanut butter and stale bread because I didn't have a bread box or a refrigerator my first semester. So my bread would always get stale really fast. And I remember eating a lot of peanut butter and stale bread. And because I didn't have a refrigerator, I also used powdered milk for my cereal, which my roommate thought was really gross, but she never offered to allow me to use her refrigerator. So it was what it was. But so college, it was a challenge to get through. Like I said, not grade wise, but financial wise. And I eventually made it through, graduated, started out in tech, information technology, and moved. Well, I actually got married while I was in college. Met my husband when I was a senior, and we married, and we both graduated from the University of Alabama, and moved to Kansas City, Missouri, and worked for Hallmark Cards as computer programmers. But I told my husband that I'd always wanted to be a writer. Well, no, I hadn't always wanted to be a writer, but I told him that I wanted to write a book. There's a big difference between wanting to be a writer and wanting to write a book. A lot of people want to write a book, but not everybody wants to be a writer. So I wanted to write a book. So if I just written one book and publish it, I was going to be happy because that's what all I wanted to do was write a book. And so he said, go for it. And I did. I wrote short stories, lots of short stories, sent them to magazines and never sold one of them. And then I finally buckled down and wrote a manuscript for a very short novel that I put away and self-published 7 years later. So I dove into self-publishing very early on in 2001, back when it was hard to do, back when you actually had to have print-ready copies, print off your pages, print ready, load them up in order with the page numbers and everything exactly the way. It's almost like first pass pages that you get from a publisher. So you had to print those off and mail them to the printer. And then you get your books. And of course, you had to buy in bulk if you wanted a good price. But it was a lot of fun. So let me see if I do have my first book nearby.
Oh, do you?
Yes. This is my first baby, The Lie That Binds, that I published in 2001.
Oh,
and it did really well. It was like mandatory reading in several schools, and it was a Barnes and Noble staff pick, which I thought was funny because I never got to see it, but my niece called me one day and said, "Did you know your book is in Barnes and Noble?" And I said, "Yeah, I know they have my book." She said, "No, your book is in Barnes and Noble. It's on display as a Barnes and Noble staff pick." And I was like, wow, that's amazing. So I got my early start in self-publishing. And like I said, it was a fun run. But my dream was always to be traditionally published. Once I really got the writing bug, once I got beyond wanting to just write a book, then I wanted to be a writer. So that's where Midnight Without a Moon came in. But it came, okay, so this came out in 2017. And this was published in 2001, I think. So help me out here, 16 years. So it took me.
It's a long road.
It's a long road. It actually took me 6 years from the time I decided I was going to really seriously pursue traditional publishing, which was in 2009. It took me 6 years to get there. And it wasn't with this manuscript. This manuscript still took about 6 months to sell, to get an agent and sell. But the manuscript that I was trying to get an agent for never landed me an agent. And I worked with it for about 5 years. So I had a long road to publishing. And then a year after Midnight Without a Moon, the sequel, A Sky Full of Stars, was published. And this is, of course, the fastest that I've had to write, because when I got a 2-book deal for Midnight Without a Moon, I did not realize that meant I had to have the second book ready within a year. So that was fun.
And tell us about these 2 books.
Okay. So Midnight Without a Moon is the story of Rosalie Carter, who is 13 and living in the Mississippi Delta in 1955. And if the number 1955 sounds familiar to you, I'm sure everyone knows that it is the year that Emmett Till visited his uncle Mose Wright in Money, Mississippi, and he was lynched. So that is the backdrop for Midnight Without a Moon. Rosalie Carter is hearing all this talk about Black people registering to vote and getting killed for helping other people register to vote. She's seeing people leave Mississippi in droves. Even her own mother packs up, marries a man, takes care of his children, packs up and leaves Rose and her brother Fred Lee in Mississippi to be raised by Ma Pearl, who is her grandmother, and Papa, who is her grandfather. And while Rose is longing to leave, Emmett Till, who was called Bobo, comes to Mississippi for a visit and does not get to leave alive. And this changes things for Rose. So that kicks things off. And then in the sequel, we know that the murderers get away with murder. And in the sequel, we see the aftermath of that trial, and we see the birth of the civil rights movement with the Montgomery bus boycott and Rosa Parks. And so 1955, that's what Midnight Without a Moon. It's Rosalie Carter's story in 1955, set against the backdrop of the Emmett Till murder, the trial, and the aftermath of that trial.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was just in Montgomery a couple of months ago and visited the Legacy Museum and the lynching memorial for the first time. And I mean, I highly recommend it, but it was also, very emotional, especially to see at the lynching memorial. There are monuments for every county in the South in which a lynching occurred. And obviously there are many, for Mississippi, and seeing your own county represented is, it's the opposite of pride, obviously.
Yes.
Because you have to face that, that happened where you're from. And yeah, so, if anyone is listening who hasn't been there yet, I would definitely recommend going to Montgomery for those two, the legacy sites. And they're also going to have a third memorial that's going to be like a river walk that's supposed to be opening later this year.
Wow.
Yeah. But, since it is February and Black History Month, we also want to recognize Black joy and Black accomplishments and celebrate Black Americans. So, are there any things that you would recommend, or like any books that you're reading for Black History Month that you're excited about, favorite authors, anything like that?
Well, my what I do for my Black History collection is children's books, because one, I love the fact that we have people who document history for children. So I'm going to shout out Alice Faye Duncan.
Yeah.
Alice Faye is documenting Black history, and I think I have every book that she's written except her very first 2 books that she wrote back in the 90s. But I have like I think I have one of her books that was written in the 90s. But I'm going to start with, and I got them right here, Traveling Shoes, because this is about a Black woman from the Mississippi Delta who I think might have been born in 1955, but she was born close to Money, Mississippi. This book just came out last year. It's about Willie B. White, and she was a 5-time Olympian, and she is from Mississippi. So this
That's
is Traveling
amazing.
Shoes by Alice Faye Duncan, and I'm just so excited that Alice is documenting Black history for children. Okay, so Willie B. White, a little known name.
Before you move on though, when you held that up, it made me realize, there's another Olympic long jumper from Mississippi who's my age, and her name is Brittany Reese. So if Alice Faye Duncan is listening, her next picture book should be about Brittany Reese, because Willie White would have led the way for her.
And there's actually a third Olympic gold medalist from Mississippi, from Rosedale, actually. Her name was Netter. Wow. All of a sudden.
We'll have to.
Yeah, all of a sudden her name, Mildred Netter. Yes. Mildred Netter was won the gold, I think in 1967 for track and field. And she's from Rosedale.
No kidding.
Okay, so companion books. When I say she's documenting history, I mean she's documenting history. So Memphis, Martin and the Mountaintop, not just another Martin Luther King book, but a book about the sanitation strike. And it is has received so many accolades, and they are, every one of them, well-deserved. And what I call the companion book is Coretta's Journey. So it's Memphis, Martin and the Mountaintop, and then a follow-up with Coretta's story, Coretta Scott King's story. And both of these are Alice Faye Duncan's works. Opal Lee and What It Means to Be Free. Miss Opal Lee, the grandmother of Juneteenth, who walked, I don't know how many miles to make Juneteenth a federal holiday, but here's the book that she and Alice Faye Duncan came up with. And this one has sold over 80,000 copies. It sold over 80,000 copies in the first year that it was published. So it's been her biggest hit so far.
And she was involved in writing the book, the actual subject.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Miss Opal Lee was actually involved in writing the book.
That's awesome.
One of my favorites, because I love the cover. Can you see that?
Yes.
Gwendolyn Brooks, A Song for Gwendolyn Brooks. And a lot of people probably don't know about this book by Alice Faye Duncan, but as I said, she's documenting Black history. And I just love that. So just for anybody listening, if you're looking for Black history books for your children, look up Alice Faye Duncan and order her books, because she is writing these books for the children. And this one is my favorite as far as illustrations and the layout. This is about the tent city in Tennessee when the sharecroppers began registering to vote. And most of us know, if you know anything about Black history in the South, if you lived on anybody's land and you registered to vote, you were kicked off the land. So all of these people who were brave enough to register to vote were kicked off the land, and they started living in tents, and they called it Tent City. So that's what this is about. And I love the illustrations and their profiles. Let's see if I can find. Each character has their own story, and they're profiled in the book in various chapters, but the profile, it's amazing. It was one of my favorite books of 2022, I believe. It's when this one came out. And she has a book She has books coming out about B.B. King, who is also a Mississippian.
That's right.
And I don't know if I'm telling too much. I don't know if it's been announced, but Robert Johnson, who,
Ooh.
the blues musician. So Alice Faye Duncan is doing the thing for Black history. So just if you want Black history books for your children, just Google Alice Faye Duncan and get some books.
She is really cool. I got to meet her at the Mississippi Book Festival last year, and she was there for her book Yellow Dog Blues.
Yellow Dog Blues,
which
yes.
is so cute.
Yes. Another book about Mississippi. So yes.
Yeah. So I'm so glad that you recommended her.
Yes.
And it made me think of a couple books that I want to recommend, although unlike you, I did not bring them for show and tell. So I'll just have to tell about them. But we did an event last year with an illustrator named Alex Bostic, who is
that's familiar.
He just retired from Mississippi State, and he contributed illustrations to a book about Juneteenth called Free at Last.
Okay.
And here's the wild connection. And if you don't know each other already, I'll have to introduce you after this. I think he also worked for the Hallmark company.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. As an illustrator, I remember him telling me
wow.
that was one of his first jobs.
Wow.
So we'll have to see if y'all were there at the same time.
Yes.
But he went on to become an artist and taught art for several years at Mississippi State and just retired. He also designed a postage stamp. That is really cool too. Yeah. So his book Free at Last is a children's picture book that, and I'm forgetting the name of the co-writer of that book. Let me see if I can look it up real quick while I'm still talking about it. Let's see. I may not be able to find it. I'll put it in the show notes. But I wanted to give that a shout out. And then I'm also I just started listening to the audiobook of Kylie Reed's new novel, which is called, what is it called? Sorry, her first book was called Such a Fun Age. Her new book is, her new book is called Come and Get It.
Oh, okay.
And I'm really enjoying it so far. It's set in the South. It's set in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And and I got to meet her at a conference last year, and she was super nice, very cool. And she actually has some family in Mississippi, so she's got a Mississippi connection too.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. So that one's an adult, adult fiction, literary fiction, but I had to throw that one in there.
Well, cool.
Yeah. So Linda, you mentioned to me right before we started recording our podcast that you have some book news, and I'd love for you to share it with everybody.
Okay. Well, remember how I said I started as an indie publisher eons ago, back when indie publishing was hard to do? Well, I am returning to indie. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of the book with me because it's in review. So I don't have a copy, but I am indie publishing a book called Saving Jimmy. And it's about a little girl named Jimmy Lee. Yes, her name's Jimmy Lee. She's named after her dad. And sometimes she gets made fun of about that name, having a boy's name, and she gets mistaken for a boy. If people don't see her and they just see the name, they assume Jimmy Lee is a boy. But Jimmy Lee lives with her mom, who hovers over her like the Secret Service, won't let her go anywhere, won't let her wear makeup, won't let her do anything cool, just afraid to let her out of her sight except for school. And she lives with her. They both live with their holy rolling aunt, Millie. So it's Jimmy Lee's great aunt Millie who keeps telling her she better hurry up and get it right with Jesus before it's everlastingly and eternally too late. And then one day it is everlastingly and eternally too late because Jimmy Lee dies. And she is faced with a choice in eternity that's going to be a very tough choice to make. So that is the book, Saving Jimmy. What will Jimmy do? What choice will she make? What choice would you make if you had to choose between heaven and earth?
So that's okay. So she can stay or she can go back.
She can stay or she can go back. but
Well,
she has to meet some people. So she has to talk to some people before she can make that choice. She can't just say, oh, I want to stay, or of course I'm going back. She has to talk to some people. So it's a cross between Heaven is for Real and the 5 people you meet in heaven.
hmm well, as you're describing the title character of the book, it makes me think of my own mom because my mom's name is Terry with ending in a Y, which is like
Mm-hmm.
the masculine
Yes.
spelling of it.
Mm-hmm.
And she was named after a male cousin who actually died as a child in a car accident.
Oh.
But all her life, she's had people, like confuse her or, like when she was younger, people would make fun of her for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited and she also loves Mitch Albom books. So the fact that you compared it to his books, she's going to be the first person I get to read this book.
Cool. Well, I hope people will enjoy it. It's of course a lot different from what I'm known for, but contemporary was my first love. Not that I won't write historical again, because I do love historical fiction, and I will write some more historical fiction. But I just have some contemporary projects that I'm working on, and I like to describe Saving Jimmy as a whimsical afterlife tale with a splash of fantasy, uh, a dash of Shakespeare, and a hint of Ebenezer Scrooge.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I also thought of A Christmas Carol as you were describing the book. So,
Okay,
well,
well, we shall see. We shall see. I really hope people like it. So.
Well, great. Well, I'm excited that we're going to be able to have it at Friendly City Books. So we are able to carry independently published books. All we ask is that authors make their books available at this company called Ingram, which is a distributor and a big warehouse that's actually out in Tennessee. And if your independently published book is distributed by Ingram, independent bookstores like us can get them. And not only that, we can get it listed at our website. So we use a online platform called bookshop.org to host our online store. And if your book is in Ingram, then we can also get it at bookshop.org. So that's one piece of advice I always like to pass along to independent authors. And Linda, do you have any like a piece of advice that you might share with someone who wants to put their story out in the world?
Okay, you mean indie?
Yeah.
One big recommendation that I would have for anybody publishing indie is you don't want to overprice your work, especially an ebook. There's no point if you're an indie author. There's no point in asking $9.99 or $8.99 for your ebook. You want people to read your book, and if you want people to take a chance on it, you might want to keep the price, $4.99 and under. That would be my biggest thing. Is one of my biggest things is you don't want to come out of the gate with your book price higher than traditional publishing. Paperback is going to be another story. You're going to have to go up a little bit on the price, but again, I don't recommend pricing a paperback that's 200 pages for $16.99 because you have a lot of competition, and price is one of the things that you'll have to compete with. So make sure it's good quality and make sure the price is right.
I'm glad you mentioned that because sometimes we do have first-time authors who have priced their books above what a traditionally published book would be priced. And that makes it really hard for us to sell your book for you. So I always recommend if you've published a novel, we would prefer to have it in paperback as opposed to hardcover in the store and to have it under $20. And same thing with children's picture books, especially if they're in paperback, that it should be under $20.
Yes.
Because that just helps people take a chance on you.
Right. And it, even with traditional publishing now, hardly anybody's buying books unless you're a book talk sensation or you were already a best-selling author. So the competition is just stiff.
Yeah.
And this is one way that you don't want to already knock yourself out of the competition with the price.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's about how many people have read your book and are promoting it to other people, right? Because I mean, someone like a Colleen Hoover started off self-publishing and doing ebooks, and she became so popular in book talk because it was so easy for people to get a book from her and to get a cheap one and to move on to the next one, you know,
Yeah.
like, and she
Yes.
made it like
Mhm.
addictive.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I'm glad you shared that advice.
Yes. Well, thank you.
All right. Well, Linda, I really want to thank you for taking the time to join us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Emily. It's always a pleasure to speak with Friendly City Books, and maybe I'll get to come to Columbus again soon and do an event with you guys. I would
Yeah,
love it.
you're always welcome back in Columbus and at Friendly City Books. So, to those who are listening and want to learn more about Linda Williams Jackson, she's got the new book, Saving Jimmy. She's got my personal favorite, The Lucky Ones, Midnight Without a Moon, and A Sky Full of Stars. And I'm going to go ahead and just close it out here and say thank you again. And to our listeners, happy reading.